Hey guys, it's Max Convexity. Hope everyone's having a great evening. I got a new fund I want to show you tonight. I'm kind of excited about. This is a fund that helps to avoid the risk with covered call funds. Have you looked at buffer funds yet? All right. This new fund, the one I'm talking about tonight is T-JEEL, T-J-U-L, but I'm talking about the whole class of class of buffer funds or strategy of buffer funds. So the good thing about buffer funds, they address two out of the three problems that covered calls have. One problem is covered calls have lots of downside, and not as much as the underlying lots of times, but it still can be a lot. Not a whole lot of upside. We know all about that, or slow upside, muted upside, as Jay likes to say, buffered, as I like to say. But number three is if the underlying that you're doing covered calls on, does really poorly, your covered call program doesn't do great either. We know that by watching, some of the stocks out here. All right, but we aren't defenseless. There's 8 high yield ETF hacks. All right. So let's see. Hack number 1 is DCA. Number 2 is DRIP. Number 3 is deploy. Number 4 is diversify. Number 5 is don't fall in love. Number 6 is different underlines. Number 7 is different asset classes. Number 8 is downside protection. Number 9, don't be a dumbass. On the dumbass part, I mean, I've done it before. I'm just joking. When these funds first came out and they're paying the numbers like 50%, 60, 70%, people freaked out. A lot of people bought these that didn't understand them. And a lot of those people aren't in them anymore. But there was a lot of interest from the general public. There wasn't a lot of good information out there at the time, not even for people like me. When these first came out, the only thing I knew, first thing that went through my head, because they teach you this in wealth management, covered calls underperform, don't you? They underperform. That you hear that in the back. That's the first thing I heard in my head. I was thinking about this and how good it looked. I was hearing in the back of my head, covered calls underperform. So I'm thinking, I bet this underperforms. But then I'm thinking, how does it underperform and pay 50%? But anyway, I think I wasn't the only one. I found some information, but it took me forever. And I ended up having to make a YouTube channel and having to, make up, find information and help other people out too. I think it's a real interesting topic. But nowadays there's 10, 20 good influencers that have a good handle on these. There's plenty of good discords where people can help you. The field of knowledge is advancing. We have some best practices now. We know some stuff to do, some stuff not to do that we didn't know in the beginning. We're aware of my theorem. It wasn't a thing 6 months ago, but now we understand. My theorem still existed. The world still worked like that. I just put a theorem to it. Anyway, R equals N plus D, or N plus D equals R. But R, total return, equals NAV return plus D, dividend return. And also Max's rule of thumb is a big one too. So if you have a high yield ETF you're looking at, the underlying, that high yield ETF pays, the high yield ETF trades calls on. You're asking that underlying to be up at least as much as the dividend is, as the yearly dividend is. So if somebody comes to me and says, and they say, hey, I got a new ETF that's a high yield covered call ETF. All right, badass. What is it? Oh, it's it's a new, AI stock, some hot AI stock that's, vol trades at about 150 or something. I don't even know. But yeah, then I'd say, okay, yeah, that's cool. Because those kinds of stocks, they have a chance of going up a lot more than that. But if you're doing if you got 100% yield in a fund and the fund's underlying is, Berkshire Hathaway or Coca-Cola, I think it's going to have a problem. There's no chance Berkshire Hathaway or Coca-Cola can support 100% dividend. Coca-Cola pays a good dividend on its own. That may not be a good example, 7 or 8% or something. But I mean, my point is those funds that trade stocks on companies that aren't high flyers, it's not only the volatility that they profit off of directly, they also indirectly profit out of the wide trading ranges that those stocks trade in, which I guess is the same thing as same volatility. All right. I've tried to record this video like 5 times, and every time there's been a screw up. I started on this about 2, and I don't even know, it's late. Hopefully this will be my last time. All right, so here's what we know. There's no free money, no getting away from risk and reward. And of course, that doesn't mean we still can't make sound decisions. And there are some decisions that are smarter than other decisions. Okay, so back to the eight hacks. DCA, we all know about dollar cost averaging. Don't put all your money in at once. DRIP, this is what you do when you put your dividends back into the fund. I've recommended 2/3. Some people recommend more. Sylvia said she knows people that are doing 80%. My good friend Tom McGee and one of my commenters looked at a study, and he thinks you need to reinvest 90%. You know, so it's something to not suffer any ill effects. Another thing is do not deploy more than 20%. In other words, don't put all your money in this. I say 20%. Talk to your own financial planner. At 10 if you can get away with it, 20, maybe 30 at the most. Anyway, but diversify. So don't put all your money in, even as good as Coney is or NVIDIA is, don't put all your money in Coney or NVIDIA. Spread it in a bunch of them. Don't just buy equity high yield ETFs. Buy some that have a different underlying, like different asset classes like bonds, oil, commodities, oil and gold, dollar, bond. Don't fall in love. That's an important one. Don't fall in love with one of these. Try to get one that uses different underlines. Don't have ones that all have the NASDAQ for their underlines or FANG stocks for their underlines, as tempting as that is. If you have FEPI and QQQY and JEPY and Bally, you aren't all that diverse enough. Now, you'll do really well when tech's doing well. But instead of that mix, try to get some that have maybe some Russell stocks, and maybe some that have some foreign stocks, and maybe some that have some commodities or bonds, some different asset classes. Okay, so those are all ways we can mitigate, problems 1, 2, and 3. There's 3 major problems. We can mitigate all 3 of those to different degrees with those things. But number 8's the main one, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. That's just get yourself downside protection, right? Easy peasy. One way to do the downside protection, there's many ways to do it. We've heard Jay talk about hedging directly with options from the Yield Max funds. We aren't going to talk about that tonight. This would be a way for an amateur to do it. I wouldn't recommend with Jay's way. You have to be a professional. Or it helps. The better you are, the better you'll do. This is what I would recommend. T-JEEL. It's a new buffer fund, and it captures downside at 0. It's supposedly trying to break Max's rule of the universe about there being no free money. When used right, this can have total downside protection, and you can still get some upside. It's a crazy fund. All right, option nerd time. I'm going to explain how this works. Okay, let's do this. Okay. Okay. Now look at this. Look at this trade right here. This right here is called a short combo. This is where it's just an option trade. There's no stock. It's where you sell a call to buy a put. Okay. It's the same thing as a short synthetic, but it has but it has split strikes. Both strikes are out of the money. You sell an out of the money call to buy an out of the money put in this case. And just as far as an option trade goes, I've seen worse trades. If you were bearish on a stock, this is a 20 lot, and we'll explain why in a second. But if you just forget about the numbers, but if you're bearish on a stock, you could put this on. If the stock goes nowhere, you make money. As long as the stock doesn't go up more than 8.6%, you have an 8.6% buffer, and then you start losing money. But just like you would when you short any stock, but the first 8.6 is paid for. And if it goes nowhere, you make money. And then if it goes down, you make money. Well, okay, so this is called a short combo. Well, a lot of people, somebody had the bright idea. Well, let's use a short combo and let's pair it with some stock. Let's pair it with the stock. So I did 20 because I'm saying, let's say a dude had $1 million of SPY. All right, so 2,000 shares of SPY would be, 1.2 million or something. This is something you could easily do yourself. Let's say you had $1.2 million of SPY on January 1st of this year, and you were nervous about the market, and you thought it might be, at highs, but you thought it could go higher, but you didn't really know. You could do this trade. And so when you combine this with the stock, it's called a collar. Now watch, I'm going to add the stock back in. I've excluded it. I'm going to include the stock. All right. So that's typically what a collar is. If it goes nowhere, you make money. If it goes up, you make money, but you're capped. You can only make 7%, but you can only lose in this collar 12%. There's different collars depending on where you set the strikes. If you sell those calls and do these, watch this. Let's sell these calls. Let's sell the 530 calls. They're going for 31 bucks. And then let's buy right there. Let's buy the 495 puts. And this goes out till June of next year. This is like 15 months because T-JEEL uses really long options. They go out 2 years is the reason I'm doing this. This is an example that you could do yourself, but T-JEEL does this also with SPY and SPX, the same thing. But in this trade I just set up, it breaks Max's rule of the universe because it essentially is, I guess, free money or risk-free money. There's still no free money, but I mean, now there's caveats to it. You have to hold for the whole time. And in T-JEEL, it even says in the prospectus, you have to hold for the whole time if you want to reap all the benefits. But in this example right here, what I might do is keep it about half the time, and then if the market doesn't go anywhere, remember, this is your $1 million. I mean, and because you were scared, I mean, it looked like the market's going, I mean, you could have done this January 1st, something similar to this. Sold some calls that financed some puts and kept your loss to roughly zero. It doesn't have to be the same. There's different combinations and they have different risk and reward. But, and some of them have like risk while the trade's on, but if you wait till the end of it, like this one, if the market drops right off the bat, you could have some risk. But then as you hold, well, some of them as you hold, your risk will go away and some of them it doesn't. But in any event, but one thing this guarantees, if you hold till expiration, you're guaranteed to have the outcome. So in this case, the outcome is it's capped at 7% up. And with these two options, and capped at 1.5% down. That was something that'd be good to do with real money. If you had some stock, you could do this for like a year or something if you're worried about a bear market coming. And if a bear market or a crash or a black swan came in that year, you would essentially lose nothing. And depending on which puts you sold and how you did it, and how you got filled on this and stuff, you could essentially insure yourself pretty much for free, at least in this example right here. I mean, in real life, the market maker may not give you these fields where you could do this. But in any event, I think this trade's an interesting trade. That's a caller. That's a short combo. And when you combine it with stock, it turns it into a caller. But it's a great trade. It's a great hedging strategy, right? Okay, so here's the front page of the prospectus. It's 79 bips. It's pretty standard. In this case right here, the starting cap was they were offering 16% on the upside with basically no downside. They bought puts and had all the downside locked out over this time period. So the reason they call this T-JEEL is that stands for July. They have this same fund that expires every 3 months, and they start them every 2 years. And so you could ladder your own portfolio using different generations maybe of this same fund. All right, so let's check out the website. So what I wanted to show you guys, we can look at the prospectus, but really this is interesting. Their visual aid is really good. So in the life of this fund, and this fund started July of 2023, and it goes to July of 2025. Okay, so in the life of this fund, it compares its NAV, and this doesn't pay a dividend, so the NAV is just the NAV. It's not also in some cash sitting somewhere that needs to be combined. This one just is you can use your buffer. You can use a covered call to pay a dividend. You can use a covered call to buy protection. Some funds use a covered call to buy a put and pay a little dividend. In any event, what I really blew me away on this is this thing just won't go down. I mean, if you hold it the whole 2 years, supposedly, or I mean, technically, you should be fine. But if you want it out, let's say you got in July of 23, then you want out it because it's October 27th, and that was pretty bad. If you remember October this year, that was pretty bad. The market was crashing. The index, the NASDAQ was off 12%. Anyway, if you look at this, T-JEEL was down less than 3%, where the market was down 8.99 at the worst. That's pretty impressive. That's 8.91 to 2.88. That's a 3-to-1 differential. The thing is, on the upside, back when the market recovered, look at this. T-JEEL, SPY's up 16%. Okay. T-JEEL's up 6%. So it's not like it gets no upside. I mean, it gets some upside, but not nearly enough. But essentially, you're taking almost no risk. So according to this, the cap on this fund, if you would have got it on the first day and hold the last day, was 16%. Is about the most upside they're calculating that you're going to get. Anyway, it's a really interesting fund. In the prospectus, they go into a little bit more detail. They use flex options. They explain how they roll them and how they do different tranches to try to avoid some of the path dependency that option strategies have. They explain that you have to hold them for the entire outcome period to get the results. And even then, the results aren't guaranteed. Of course, nothing's guaranteed. Okay. I'm trying to see if there was anything else that I wanted to go over. 79 basis points. I mean, it did say in here that the max, like in that one example I showed you, max upside was 16.92 or something like that. That's before fee. After the fee, it was like 15.98 or so. I was just reading it. It's 16.6, and you take off the 79 bips, and it comes to 15, like I said, 88 or something. I just read it. But and you also have to take off trading cost and everything, and expenses, and if they have any extraordinary cost. Still an interesting fund, and I think it has a place, even though it doesn't pay a dividend. It has a place in a portfolio potentially, and I'm going to give an example here. let's first look at how this thing's done against some other funds. So here's against JEPY. Now JEPY beat it. Good job, JEPY. What I noticed though is T-JEEL got less downside. It just only got about half as much downside, and JEPY didn't get very much downside in October. T-JEEL got even less. So it did its job in it didn't get as much upside, but it didn't get as much downside. Well, JEPY beat T-JEEL also, but JEPY got a lot more downside than T-JEEL and a lot more downside than JEPY, of course. Now, Bally is a really good fund with a lot of upside. It's an upside monster. I've always called that one. And sure enough, it beat T-JEEL pretty bad, but it got a lot more downside. T-JEEL had a lot less downside, about a third the downside of Bally. And we would expect that because Bally's more of a high flyer, so it's going to have less downside protection, but it's going to be able to go more on the upside. And of course, GPIX is the highest flyer of all of them. I'm going to compare GPIX and Bally in a separate video. And I may compare SFOL in there with them too. But in any event, I promised somebody I'd do a video on GPIX soon, and I promise it'll be the next one I do, or the next couple. Okay, so also just on a tangent, I decided to test it against SFOL, because SFOL is another short volatility fund on the S&P indirectly, and SFOL outperformed T-JEEL on the downside, which I think is amazing. Because T-JEEL buys puts. SFOL doesn't buy any puts. SFOL is just, I always call it steady Eddie. I talk about it all the time. I need to do more content on it, but it is a steady Eddie. Every day it seems like 20 bips. Seems to be real consistent on the buffer report. All right, so here's some applications for this fund. It's, obviously this fund is not for everybody, because when you lock out all the downside, you'd leave a ton of upside on the table. You're using the upside to pay for the protection. Okay, well, we know that. But there is two examples I thought of. Okay, so let's say somebody's rich, but not filthy rich. Let's say they have like a $2 million retirement portfolio. They're a millionaire, they're comfortable. Let's say they want to try to retire 10 years early. So they're kind of pushing it. People live longer, and let's say they have $2.5 million between him and his wife. Well, they're scared to death that they're going to retire, and then the 2008, 2009 situation is going to hit, and plus the market has been looking dicey lately, right? And they want to retire now. So, and they got their $2.5 million, but they don't want to turn it into $1.5 million. Even if the market generally goes up over time, they don't have the time to make it up, because it might make them run short on money for retirement. They might have to go back to work. So that'd be a situation maybe where they could allocate, instead of being in their normal growth, put it in this thing for 5 years. So you sacrifice a lot of upside. You're going to cost yourself some upside, or 3 years, 2 years. Get yourself through this little pinch and keep the money growing, and make sure we don't have a 2008, 2009. It's an idea. Mark Cuban used this in real life, a caller trade where he put a short combo on a stock position. He had a huge stock position in Yahoo because he sold his company, broadcast.com, to Yahoo in 97, 98. Anyway, the internet and the market, especially for tech stocks, was way overbought, and people had been calling for a crash for like a year in 99. And by the time 2000 got here, it was just screaming. Anyway, Cuban didn't want to see all his money evaporate, and he was locked out for some reason, contractual reasons or something. He couldn't sell his Yahoo for a year because he was on the board or something. I don't remember. Well, anyway, so he couldn't sell his Yahoo, but his brokers put a collar on that thing. And sure enough, finally, the market did crash in 2001, and that collar paid off, and he saved himself billions. And that's a very famous collar trade, probably one of the most famous option trades that I can think of, if not the most famous. Here's another one. I have a little bit of experience with this, not anymore, but maybe in my younger days. Let's say you're living a little bit beyond your means. Let's say maybe you just had you sold a business, you made five mil. Let's say you made 5 mil in Dogecoin or something, whatever. You made in some NFTs. You got some money, but you're only 45. So 5 million's, it's all right, but you The other catch is you just spent $3 million on a boat and you put a down payment down, but it's going to be built. It's being custom built in Italy for you, and yacht, and it's going to be in Miami here in about a year, and you have to show up with the other 2.7 million. Not to mention you're going to need to insure it, dock it, tag it, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so you have 5 million, which is great, but you are not, can't risk that 5 million. It's spoken for. 4 million of it's gone as we speak, right? And let's say you're already kind of a high roller and you have high expenses other places. You better watch your, this would be a good case for allocating some into this fund, because yeah, you could also do a CD or or T-bills or something, but then you don't have any chance of any upside. At least with this fund, the one we looked at, you can maybe get 16%, less fees, so you can hope for 14 or 15%. If the market keeps screaming up and you're wrong about the crash coming, well, you make another 14%. It's on $5 million, that'll work, especially because you're going to 3 million to the, or 2.7 to the boat building company in Italy, and and then you're going to have to, like I say, you're going to have to get a slip and all that kind of stuff. All right, so the conclusions I draw from this, I'd be anxious to hear what you guys say in the comments. And my examples on how you could use this fund may have been ridiculous, and I don't know. If you have better ideas, tell me, or I don't know how realistic those were, and I don't know, but tell me if you guys would use this fund in your life, if you could ever see a use for this fund. I did kind of have to go out there on a limb to find a really good use case. But of course, we know there's no free lunch. So yes, you can lock out all your downside, but it's at a tremendous cost to you. So are you really locking out your downside? I guess you are locking out your downside, but you know what I'm saying. But how are you affecting the whole picture? Remember, total return's all that counts, right? So if we go by that, and even though we know we're locking out all the downside, if we're crushing our total return, what kind of favor are we doing locking out the downside to ourselves? I mean, it's up for everyone to decide, and talk to your planner. Okay, the other conclusions are GPIX and JEPY are great funds. They don't offer much downside protection. And Bally too. A JEPY offers a lot of downside protection, but they don't get near as much upside as the other ones I just mentioned. I mean, it's anyway. T-JEEL offers even more downside than any of those other ones we just mentioned, but they get even less upside than JEPY gets, JEPY gets. Okay. Well, and then SVOL is kind of an oddball, because SVOL for some reason gets even less downside than all of them. Anyway, so SVOL is going to go on my top of my list to get some special attention. It's obviously had a hell of a run, and I know Charles has tried to tell me that a million times. Half my subscribers, all you guys like SVOL, and it's not that I don't not like it. I just love equity options, and selling VIX futures. I mean, I understand the concept, but it's not, to me, it's not as tangible as writing those cover calls. That that's what I know. But anyway, it obviously works very well. So I do mention SVOL, not enough, but I do mention in the buffer report every day. All right, guys. You guys have a good night. This video took forever to record. Hopefully this time will be my last time. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I've taken a little bit of time off, but I'm going to be back at it full time. This is my first real video in about a week. This is my first video with an actual, I think last Sunday I did a long rambling hour-long video, which is basically what this probably is too. So in any event, I'm trying to be more on point. I hope I rambled less. I appreciate you guys for listening very much. Remember, get your own financial advice, and that's always a good thing, to double check anything here. Even if you have a financial advice, maybe get financial advice from 2 people, right? Can't be too safe. All right, guys. You guys have a wonderful evening, and I'll be back in the morning.